right now, because no one sees the big threat on the horizon. So here's how it's playing out. The way it's playing out is in cyber. The way it's playing out is in pressure on our allies. The way it's playing out is a test. That's all it is. It's a test to see how you're going to react and respond. We're not looking for troops on the horizon or some amphibious landing, but we are looking for a response. Secretary Clinton went so far as to try and clarify U.S. positions and interest in the region. That created a huge reaction. It was a welcome reaction from the point of view of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations because they needed the United States. The view that we hear from our partners in the region is any reduction of U.S. forward presence is a game changer. We simply do not trust one of our own to lead in this region. So what the United States has brought is the form of a guarantee. Those are not our words, it's their words. That's how they look at us, as a counterbalance. They don't want us right directly in their ports, they want us over the horizon. They want to know that we're nearby and that we can be responsive in time of need. If we manage this right, then we figure out a way to sustain our forces and react and respond in a way that's proactive so that the rule of law and the rules-based system that we put into effect after World War II simply continues, and with that, economic prosperity. So the role we play is one where politics and diplomacy lead the effort, and we're the backup. We're not trying to replace or supplant other national efforts to achieve, I think, stable, secure political outcomes. Thank you.
Well, before I turn it over to folks for question, I'll just answer Pat very quickly. You know, the ultimate refuge of a strategist is always to hide behind Clausewitz, because no one's ever read him and no one understands him if they did. But Clausewitz has said throughout his works that it's not about the peripherals, it's about war. And the purpose for building our military forces is war. If you don't know who the enemy is, then you have to build a balanced force. And you have to look, as I said earlier, to patterns of behavior rather than inventing them. And you have to ask yourself what occurrences or what occasions in the world rises to the level that would cause us to go to war. And I'm sorry, tsunami, fishing, piracy, partnership, and the rule of law doesn't get you there. What gets you there is ungoverned states that sit near one of our local centers of gravity, which is probably oil. And the third dimension would be nuclear weapons. I think Mike said, and I think rightfully, that when the nuke goes off in New York City, that changes everything. So I have no problem with a bigger Navy and a bigger Air Force. I absolutely agree with that. But my issue, and the issue that I'll carry to my grave, which given my age is probably not too far away, is that at the end of the day, we have to look at patterns of behavior. At the end of the day, the initiative is run by the enemy, is held by the enemy and not by us. And it's just that simple. So a balanced force, air, sea, land forces, I think, is the best deterrence about what essentially is the ultimate uncertainty.
Let me because we've done a lot of pontificating here, but to give you a framework of how the forces side of the equation is structured today and has been for about the last 15 years. And it's relatively simple. Any place in the world across the entire range of what you would want to use your military for, whether it be for a tsunami, a hurricane, or nuclear war, the structure is set such that we can get any place in the world that our interests are impeded, whether it's because you close off the flow of oil or you have a hurricane, in 5 days, and by 10 days, bring it to stability. And by 30 days, be able to transition it, if necessary, to diplomacy. That's how we then build structure. That is what's called the posture. So of the operating forces that are available to us today, they are allocated out across the world in order to, in 5 days, stop an activity that would close off our interests or infect our interests, in 10 days to bring it to stasis, in other words, to be in between the two fighting parties or whatever is necessary, and in 30 days be able to return it to diplomacy for action in a diplomatic format. That's essentially what we try to do. We aren't able to do that all of the time, but that is the construct against which we then justify structure. okay? Is added into that is general purpose war, et cetera, but that's the construct of availability that we have used for the forces for the last 15 years. So just to
Okay.
use that as a way to then start the discussion, no more pontification from up here, it's yours.
Exactly. This, we've probably talked much too long. Questions from the audience, please? Just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. I know you're out there. I can hear you breathing. Yes, sir. Would you stand up, please?
I'll try to speak.
Yeah, is a microphone coming your way?
Not a problem. My name's Greg Smith. This is for General Scales and also for General Walsh a little bit here. There are two basic principles historically of blood and treasure that are the basic principles of warfare that I've heard over my history lessons. Do you not see a change, dramatic change in the focus of modern war and the preparedness for modern war to be more about destroying our ability to maintain our treasure, not necessarily our blood? And if so, does that not indicate that Admiral Walsh's comments about China and their concept of unrestricted warfare is as dangerous as your general warfare concept?
Actually, that's a wonderful question. You know, the issue, a lot of people have compared the General Secretary of China to Wilhelm II in the 1890s, and the arms race, which was essentially a naval arms race between the two. And it came down to your point. It came down to treasure, and historians have made the argument that the one most likely to spend himself into penury in that was Great Britain and not Germany. Great point, and I think you're absolutely right. I would offer you an article done a couple of months ago, I think, by Greg Jaffe in the Washington Post in the Outlook section, where he talked about the world really not, at least now, not being all that dangerous. That in fact, that the world, as we pull out of Afghanistan, the world is as quiescent as it's been in terms of contemporary wars as it's been in a long time. So I have as a citizen, tax-paying citizen, and apparently I'm going to be paying a lot more here pretty soon, I have no problem at all with taking a hard look at the treasure part as well as the blood part. I don't think there's any question in that. And I think what this administration is going to do well is to sharpen the pencils in order to get to that. I think Admiral Mike Mullen said that the greatest national security threat to the United States is our deficit in the budget rather than a specific enemy. So we can't spend recklessly, nor can we get into an arms race with China and match them, ship for ship and man for man. Can't do that. So what's missing is a strategy. What's missing is wisdom. What's missing is the ability to take risk at the right places and at the right time. So I think your question really, in a way, I'm not trying to patronize you, but your question in a way sort of, is the keystone of what we're going to do for the rest of the day.
I think one of the benefits of having fighter pilots up here is knowing when you're targeted.
Or targeting.
To describe a cost-imposing strategy would be an interesting lens to look at what 19 men did to the United States and what we've had to pay for in blood and treasure since. I'm really struck by the quiescent remark. It smacks of language in the run-up to World War I, that there were economic ties among the community of nations, the concert of nations that predicted, I think, a very stable world, because it was always in the national interest to not fight with someone that was your trading partner, your economic partner. And I look at the world that we're in today, and I'm just struck by how many times we've misunderstood China. And I think Bob would agree with me on this. It is the only country in the community of nations where we have this rhetorical question of who lost China. Well, why are we asking the question? Because we thought we understood China in World War II. And we were shocked and surprised, the China hands were. And in 1949. And in 1971, they came back and appeared before the Foreign Relations Committee and were asked the question of, how did you get it wrong? Well, we got it wrong because we didn't understand China. I find it fascinating that part of the national security strategy is to help shape China. Really. To borrow a question from Bob.
Well, okay, and
no, wait a
I'll give you 30 seconds on this.
Okay.
Let's let the
No,
audience.
no,
let's let the
hang on,
audience
I'm
have
in
a
charge.
chance.
You hear about this comparison, pre-World War II comparison all the time. What's missing, of course, is the personalities. William II was not whoever the head of China is right now. Okay, next question. Yes, ma'am.
This is based on something that General Cartwright said. You mentioned that the North Korea problem is 50 to 100 years in the making as a solution for China, Russia, and South Korea, and most likely they will not go to war with North Korea. Well, in that case, what is the role of the United States in the North Korea issue?
I think that's the key issue right now. We haven't figured out what our role is. For 50 years, we've been the guarantor of South Korea's sovereignty. Okay, that transition is occurring now. They are a stable nation. They actually can afford their own defense, have been affording their own defense. They have elements that they'd like to draw from us, things that we can do better than probably anybody in the world. So the question now is, what is our role in the northern part of the Pacific? Where would we add the greatest value, and therefore what kind of capabilities would you put in that area as you start to think of a strategy going forward? And so that's what I'm trying to tease out with you is the world up there has changed. And so as we apportion precious forces that we can't afford all of that we want, what do you put up there as a capability that would ensure that that stability occurs, that no incursion, whether they be like the Chonan or something else, turns into an all-out war rather than an incursion? And so that's the challenge. Do we keep what we've had there for 50 years, or do we readjust that posture to something that may be more appropriate, knowing that the unknown out in front of you could be going back to war, which would be catastrophic for the region, not just for the United States?
Bob, let me comment on that. As a former lead negotiator with the North Koreans at the DMZ and have been to Pyongyang, I think we don't understand North Korea. And it's actually very simple. They're not a country. They're a crime family gang, a mafia family. It's ruled by Kim Jong-un and about 500 of his classmates and friends and his father's friends, et cetera. And you have a very dangerous situation when you have a state, I'll call it a state, but it's not really a state, when you have a state where one guy can make the decision to go to war. To piggyback on Bob's comments earlier, when you think about the destruction on the peninsula if there is a war, for whatever the cause is, 500,000 rounds per hour, artillery rounds in the opening stages of a war. I used to have debates with Secretary Rumsfeld, and he would say, look, here's my picture. It's all dark there, therefore they can't fight. And I'd say, how much strength does it take to pull a lanyard on an artillery piece? Can you imagine the devastation that would occur should we have a war? So it's an understanding of the threat. I do agree with Husch in that we've been there to help preserve the peace. We've also bluntly been there to kind of educate South Koreans not to get so upset that they're going to attack back when there's a provocation of some sort. So there's a duality of what our forces have been there for a long period of time. And I do agree with Husch that this is, I do not see North Korea going away anytime soon.
Next question? Yeah, and wait for the microphone once you deliver that to him. And just stand up and state your name.
My name is Bruce Hamilton. I'm in the energy business, and I want to address something that you, General Scales, said, and also Admiral Walsh. You talked about a good Army is like wine. It has to age. It has to be in fine bottles. So it takes time to build up a good Army. And Admiral Walsh, you talked about the run-up to the First World War and the Guns of August briefly. So with those kind of as context, I'd like to look at what Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says about the difference between the Army and the Navy. The Army is funded, the Constitution says essentially that the Army shall be raised, but in a separate line, it says that the Navy shall be maintained. Now, we didn't have an Air Force in the 18th century, so General Dunn, I would argue you're more likely to be in the category of the Navy than the Army. But the point here is that I think the founders understood a standing Army, which needs to be aged like wine. A standing Army can be a very dangerous thing. In the absence of a standing Army in the European forces leading up to the First World War, we might not have had the Guns of August. We might not have had Lyndon Johnson sending us into Vietnam based on an erroneous report of attack on the 4th of August, 1964. We might not have had President Clinton sending forces into Bosnia, where certainly there was a humanitarian issue, but not a clear national interest issue. We might not have had the first President Bush sending us into Kuwait. All of these undeclared wars that we fought with standing armies. So my question is, were the founders trying to tell us that an army can be a standing army can be a very dangerous thing, whereas a Navy in force can protect us but not invade other countries' sovereign territory?
Yeah, I'll answer you very briefly, but I will also say that once I complete this answer, each of you will get 3 credit hours at the Army War College. Just send me an email. Yeah, I mean, this is the perennial Anglo-American military tradition that goes back to the 17th century, and the centrality of the militia as America's preferred method of going to war. Because the United States, I think, remains today the only democratic Western power that has never been ruled by the military. Amen. And I think that is one of the motives, has long been. Now, talk to Ike Skelton, he'll tell you it has long been one of the motives why the American people have been reluctant to raise a large standing army. The other thing I'll tell you is that the presence of an army or the lack of an army or the particular readiness of the Army has had little or nothing to do with stupid political decisions. And the idea that if we don't have an army, we won't go to war, the answer to that is really, if we don't have an army and we go to war, we'll raise one, as we've done in big wars in the past. And we will build an army that learns to fight by fighting, rather than learns to fight by training.
Bob, I just want to add to it just the importance of what we've learned with the all-volunteer force. For those who remember what the world looked like in 1972, we were a mix of conscripts as well as people that were part of the professional force. It was very hard to manage and shape the force.
Right.
Now we're a force that values experience, and with that comes what we see as a requirement for higher education over the course of a career. It's a covenant that we have between the member and the service. It benefits the service, it benefits the member. And so as we get into this discussion, what we're all very concerned about is the day when the guns stop firing, we have a force with a lot of combat experience, but no mission.
You know, it's interesting. I'm about to agree with Pat on this, so hold your breath. He is absolutely right. Militaries change principally as wars wind down. This has sort of been a historical precedent in the 20th century. And the preparation of the military to set itself for the next conflict is normally determined about now. We have an army or a military that's had 10 years of war, 1 year at a time, all learned at the tactical level in a counterinsurgency environment. There's no guarantee that that type of war, style of war exactly will continue in the future. So I think job one is not a technological budgeting issue, but it's a human issue. And it deals with professional military education and the ability to reset the force for war in the future. And it's free. It's not free, but it certainly is a lot cheaper than focusing only on a material solution. So absolutely, we've learned the value of cultural awareness, the need for adaptability and agility, the ability to outthink rather than outshoot the enemy. We've learned oftentimes the enemy is a lot smarter than we think he is and understands us better than we do. So, and what Pat says is absolutely true. Having said that, what I've also seen, sadly, lately, is a military and specifically Congress that has not put the emphasis on education as perhaps they should. Let's see, I'll take the gentleman right there. Would you bring him a microphone, please? Please stand.
Okay, good morning. I'm Edward Retta. I'm just a local small business owner. Long introduction, easy question. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thanks to the Tower Center. This is fabulous. I'm a lowly civilian, but I want to thank each of you for your service to our country. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
My question is in the context of the fact that we've just been through an election. And it appears to me that our voters get their ideas from pop culture and Hollywood. And so my question is to each of you, what is it that the American voter, the American taxpayer, does not get about our military strategy, forces, and budgets from where you sit in your vast experience that we need to better educate our voters on in the future? Thank you.
Husch, you want to take that?
I mean, I think the answer has really been in the dialogue that we've had of the value of national security and where it should sit in precedent, and what resource in the resource competition, what share of the resource is necessary for it to be viable, what are the elements of it that you need to have in order to be credible and carry out the desires of this country in its quest for security and an ability to do global commerce and other things. So that dialogue has occurred today. What is, I think, somewhat masked here, and I'll go back to the demographic discussion, is what are our personal interests in comparison to that? If you have a good thing and you've had it all your life, you start to assume it.
Right.
And so that the question here is, should the reflection of the cost of what it is that we have, that has enabled us to have the lifestyle that we have, and the riches, you know, however you measure wealth, whether it be in education or the huge panoply of things that we have today, where does that security rank? And have we masked the value of it by assuming that it will always be there no matter what, or that we can raise the Army when we need it, or raise the Navy, or whatever it is, maintain the Navy? So it's the assumption of that underpinning construct of the Constitution and its value and its cost in that election construct as we go forward. There's a lot of us that believe maybe the education process, because we all need to be educated and reminded about those things, has not been at the forefront of some of these conversations. Not that it necessarily needs to be, because it's the economy stupid type mindset in this one. But to do what? What is our value system? And that's the hard part. We're trying to answer the symptoms, and we may walk right past the causes.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, in many ways, the military is like the Catholic Church. You know, there are a few errant priests, more so lately than in the past. But as a general rule, the American people respect the institution, but generally don't want to join. So I think the problem is not with the American people so much, but it's with us. And my fear is that as we come back from war, and as as the active military perhaps is resentful about either the election or about being precipitously pulled out of a war they believe is unfinished. And many in the military are relegated to these large mega bases as opposed to the old Army in my generation, which was scattered about the country, is that I am concerned, by the 3 more credit hours, I am concerned about the state of civil-military relations, which is your question. And my fear is that we will return to a frontier military with a frontier mindset. I don't think that's going to happen. But that's that's the military's problem to fix, not yours. And at the end of the day, the military is here to serve the American people. And the connection between the American people and their military is vital. And we can't allow those rifts to occur. And again, I'll I've said this before, but if you look at the Army of the Reconstruction after the Civil War, if you look at the Army in the 1921-22 period and the Army 1946-47, you will see that rift begin to occur between the professional and the amateur Army, professional Army and the military and the American people. And frankly, that worries me quite a bit. That's an excellent question.
Can I
Yeah.
add something? I would just say that I was struck in the debates and in the campaigns with the short-term focus of the American people. I mean, we know it takes a long time to build an Air Force, a long time to build a Navy, a long time to equip the Army and Marines with the equipment they need. We know we're going to have to cut. I was also struck with the fact that successes have actually hurt the military. In other words, if you think about it, the last soldier killed by enemy air power was in 1953. And therefore, we're kind of a victim of our own successes going forward. I strongly disagree with Admiral Mullen's statement about the number one threat to the nation is the economy. That's true until something happens. You let a nuclear weapon go off in Dallas, and nobody's going to be talking about how this number one threat is the economy and the problems going forward. So somehow we have to get America to look beyond the near and now with what's going on in the world. And that is a very tough thing to do, and will take a lot of leadership for the nation.
Bob, just to finish up, the one thing I notice is I don't think the American people understand the value proposition. We're talking about in a country of 330 million people with trillions of dollars in our gross domestic product. In our case, it's 125,000 sailors. It's 2,000 aircraft. It's 180 ships out in the Pacific representing our interest. And to know